Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Battling Challenges, COVID and Complexity, Chicago Tube and Iron Achieves its Transformation. Our goal today is to provide you with beneficial insights that will help you get the most out of your enterprise technology investments. Attendee phones will be muted for the duration of the presentation. Please feel free to send me a chat if you run into any technical difficulties during the event. We encourage everyone to submit questions at any time using the Q&A feature. We will address your questions during the Q&A segment at the conclusion of the discussion. And you can access both the chat and Q&A features of Zoom by hovering your cursor over the bottom center of your webinar screen and clicking on the icons. And if you could advance the slide for me to our agenda. Perfect, thank you. Today's session will run for 45 minutes and conclude at 1:45 p.m. Central Time. We'll kick off the session with introductions to today's panel, and then we'll quickly move on to the main event, a thoughtful discussion on Chicago Tube and Iron and how they achieved a successful business transformation. Following the discussion, we'll share some additional resources that are available to our audience today before moving on to Q&A during the remaining time. I'd like to take a brief moment to let you know that Ultra Consultants is serving as your host today and to tell you a little bit more about who we are. Since 1994, manufacturers and distributors throughout North America, as well as companies with global operations, have teamed with Ultra as trusted advisors and industry best practice experts to guide them through their business process improvements and enterprise technology transformation journeys. As independent ERP consultants, our team is part of our clients' organization, working shoulder to shoulder with ERP project teams throughout the country. Being a vendor independent consulting firm means two main things. First, we're your partner for guiding you in your vendor education and selection, and that's where we help you get to know in depth the enterprise software vendors and implementation practices that are best for your company and your unique project needs. Second, we are also your partner for helping you discover how to make improvements throughout your organization using your chosen technologies. Please feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to learn more about Ultra, or you can visit us at ultraconsultants.com. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's experts. From Chicago Tube and Iron, we are very happy to have Vice President of Information Technology, Chris Prodell. From Ultra Consultants, we have Managing Director of Client Services, Joe Velez. And joining us from the Epicore team, we have Robert Brown, Senior Product Manager for Manufacturing, and Scott Marienthal, Principal Territory Manager. Thank all of you for joining us today. We appreciate your expertise. And with that, I will hand it over to Scott to give us a brief overview of Epicore.
Thank you, Kristen. Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We had the great pleasure of working with Ultra and Chicago Tube and Iron in their ERP evaluation, so we're delighted to take part today. So a little bit about Epicore. We've been around for 50 years. That's a long time, and we've seen an awful lot of transformation in that period, but none more so than in the last couple of years. I would say the acceleration has picked up considerably. We're represented in 150 countries around the world. Those are companies based in foreign locations and an awful lot of American-based companies who have foreign locations as well. So that really speaks to the multi-nature of Epicore in that it's multilingual, multi-currency, multi-company, and we can scale with your requirements as well should you be crossing any borders. We're $1 billion in revenue, give or take, which puts us in the higher echelon of ERP providers. And the next statistic on the right-hand side there is one we're most proud of. As you all probably know, ERP implementation is not easy. It takes a lot of effort, and there are plenty of obstacles that need to be overcome. So the fact that we get such a high rating with our customers is something we're jealously proud of and protect as best we can. We've got 27,000 customers around the world. Now that's companies, not users. The user count is significantly higher than that. And there's 3,800 of us. Epicore operates a direct model. So our idea is all the sales, implementation, support, development, all comes direct from Epicore. That's our strategy for that. And the last two statistics there speak to the huge wave towards cloud deployment. Now, we still believe in offering choice. So Epicore can be deployed on premise or in the cloud. It's your choice. But we've seen a huge move towards cloud. And currently, 60% of our new customers decide that they want their system to be in the cloud. So that's it for me, Kristen.
Okay, so let me, I'm Joe Velez with Ultra, and I want to sort of get things kicked off on the diving into the actual transformation process that we did. And if you think about a general transformation definition, we're really trying to drive key business processes to an improved future state that are impactful or transform the business. And every client, every project, every client has maybe a different experience. For Chicago Tube, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Purdell, who's the VP of IT, and he'll talk about the Chicago Tube transformation experience and give you an overview of Chicago Tube itself.
Thank you, Joe. Welcome, everybody. My name is Chris Prodell. I'm the Vice President of IT here at Chicago Tube and Iron. We're a metal service center. We have 8 locations throughout the Midwest, mostly, and 1 in North Carolina. We are proud of our 100-plus year history of a company, and we're well into our 2nd century of servicing our customers. So we sell steel. We have over 30,000 line items of steel that we sell, mostly comprised of steel tubing, bar, pipe, and fittings. A typical end use of a product would be, let's take a boat trailer, for example. We could sell the manufacturer the structural tubing for that boat trailer. We could cut that tubing to size. We could bend it. We could weld it. And we could also drill holes, grooves, notches in that with our laser tube cutters. So this is a sample. If you could see, I'm holding it up. This is just a sample little thing of what our laser tube machines can cut. So they can get quite intricate. So at the first example, we're just a pure distributor. The last one, where we call ourselves a fabricator. We don't really do finished assemblies, so we're kind of a combination distributor fabricator. I suppose because you're on this call today that you're either just starting an ERP implementation or you're thinking about jumping on that ERP train. So hopefully our discussion can help make your trip easier.
Great. Thank you, Chris. So let's talk about the start of the project, kind of business drivers a little bit. Maybe you can give us a little background, Chris, on how you began the transformation and what drove you to the decision to move forward.
Sure. So that was back in the summer of 2017, and we met with myself and the Chicago Tube and Iron Executive Council, and it was really kind of an easy decision. We were on our distribution system was a 30-year-old green screen custom-built system that we were afraid we would wake up one day and not be able to support. So it was the proverbial burning platform. So we knew we had to change. Prior to that, maybe several years prior to that, we had bought a fabrication system because that the green screen system didn't really work well for our fabrication side of the business. So we had an operational fabrication system that worked. We also had an accounting system. So it was really those 3 systems working together that was what we ran our business on, and it just wasn't stable. But really, the main driver was that 30-year-old system.
Okay, and that posed some certain parameters that we're trying to reach as part of your transformation. Robert, can you share with us, what do you typically see? Is this typical of what you see? What was different about Chicago Tube?
Well, in general, really nothing. This is a very typical situation that companies find themselves in. Either they've got a legacy system, or in some cases, I've seen even 50, 60, $70 million a year companies being run on spreadsheet and yellow pads, right? So this is not uncommon when you find yourself in a position where what you've been doing for some number of years is no longer sustainable. And particularly in the case where you've got siloed systems, or you're running on yellow pads, you have the situation where you come to the operations meeting on Monday morning, and not everybody's numbers on their yellow pads are the same numbers. And so one of the main drivers is, obviously a single source of truth. You want to get to that so that everybody is looking at the same data, and all that data is being entered faithfully, and there's transactional discipline, and because all of that stuff in the end goes up to your general ledger, and you want that to be accurate, you want it to be true, and so it's a very important thing when you embark on this journey. The whole point of the exercise is to come out of it better than where you started.
Yeah. And, in Chicago too, but I think a kind of an umbrella concept here is this idea that they were just doing distribution and fabrication under the same roof, but in two different systems. And both of them were burning platforms, kind of dead end. So that posed a number of interesting things. Chris, as Chicago 2 was deciding to start the project, even to the point of, bringing in help to start the project, how did that go? Give us a background on the decisions made and how that kind of, the dynamic.
Yeah, that was, quite honestly, Joe, we made two decisions early on that I felt really helped us out. And one was, discussing with the executive council, I had asked them to use a consultant. I said, we do a lot of things well here at Chicago 2, but we like to think we do anyways. But, changing systems isn't one of them. It's not our core competency, and we wanted to find somebody who is their core competency. Second was, I asked that we make this a company project and not an IT project. And I think we all know, the horror stories we hear when, an executive team says, okay, IT, go implement that ERP system and come back and tell me when it's done. So, we didn't want that, and luckily they agreed with me on both those counts and said yes and yes to those, and I really feel that that grounded us soundly for the project to begin.
Excellent. One thing in terms of executive leadership and executive support, how do you feel you were supported? How important was that? Yeah,
it was great. Like I said, there really wasn't any discussion on either of those 2 points. What's funny is we're owned by Olympic Steel, and they went through their own ERP journey. And even when we talked to their executives, they were all, they were bought in, and I think their expectations were realistic. So I think that helped as well, that they had gone through that. But going back to our executive team, I think Don and Bill and Mike at the time, they were all hands in and led from the front, which I think proved crucial to people on the ground when they saw that.
Yeah. One of the things I said for purposes of the audience, I was actually the project manager that Ultra had on the ground working with Chris. So Chris and I were sort of partnered throughout this transformation, and I was had a front row seat to the leadership support, the sponsorship. Remember, we're taking the whole company live with all locations. And in order to do that, we had to create teams and create a structure that would make certain that we had a common best for CTI solution across the board. And so the leadership support to bring that about, that doesn't always go perfectly. So it takes flexibility, it takes patience, and then it takes good communication. and dedication by the employees. So good. We really saw that.
That's terrible, and that's a very important point. Joe, when you're talking about those types of things, or when you're doing these projects, you really need to make it a company project. If it's an IT project, that's like one of the very first things that you do if you want it to fail, is make it an IT only project, because it's not. It's financial, it's operations, it's the entire company, stem to stern, and your ERP system is going to reflect what your policies are, and it should reflect what your policies are and how you run your business.
Great. Thank you. You can advance. One thing that we want to share is when we talk about the transformation journey, what you see on your screen is sort of at a macro level, the flow that we typically use with clients, where we go through a business process analysis and develop some key target future state elements that then are used in selecting software. And then finally, of course, we do the implementation. So let's talk about the selection experience itself and how that went, Chris. I have some observations myself that I want to hear.
Sure. So I'm a big fan of that, of the methodology, the Ultra methodology. So what you're showing there is good. I like to think that it was very, working with Ultra, and by then we assembled our core team, and our core team had at that point probably 30 people on it, and we met and we were building that future state, and it really got us going in the right mindset of meeting, and everybody had a day job, right? But they we were pulling people in from all of our different locations, and we got them in that mindset of this is what it's going to take to be a successful project, and you really got to sacrifice. So we kind of followed the flow. I remember we kind of worked down the potential vendors to eventually 3. Obviously Epicore was one of them, and then just the decision making. When we saw the demonstrations, and we met Scott, and he did a good job. The scorecard that Ultra had, we kind of comprised all the votes and everything from everybody, and it was kind of a clear choice, really, when we looked through that.
One thing that's key to underscore is during that process, the core team, the team that was developed, that was made up of business process owners, they're the ones that evaluated the demonstration, the different functionalities that were exposed during the technology selection work to get us down to the final vendor of choice. And that's a key thing. So Ultra did not say, here's who you should go with. IT didn't say, Chris didn't say, guys, this is who you should go with. It was more a collective conclusion with the process owners being at the helm. And I think that that's a leading practice. Too many times, if you go down a path where the process owners aren't involved, you're back to what Robert was describing earlier as an ugly. So Scott, how did all this look from your side of it? When we talk about the selection process, you were involved in the negotiations, all that. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, probably about 50% of the selection processes we work with do not have a consultant and a selection firm like Ultra involved. And what we usually find is they are really quite disorganized. A lot of times people go into a selection for ERP without really understanding where they want to get to. It's just a changing of software process, and that can lead to unfortunate outcomes. Now, the benefit of working with Ultra and you, Joe, was that you'd spent a significant amount of time with Chris and the Chicago Tube team to understand where they are today and where they want to be, and a path to get there. And that makes life, as an ERP vendor, that makes life an awful lot easier for us, because you can tell us exactly what you want, and we can do our best to show that we can provide it. And it really does make the whole selection process a lot faster, a lot less disruptive, and ultimately it will save you dollars, I believe, because you don't invest in something that perhaps can't fit your business as well as you would like.
Very good. You know, the selection process itself, just that piece, the technology selection phase, if you will, was only a 3-month cycle. It was done in under 3 months. Of course, before that, we did the business process improvement analysis and developed future state and all that. But we got ourselves in the funnel, the down select to the 3, and then finally to select Epicore was a fairly efficient process. So that was good. Now comes the challenge. Then came with implementation. You know, there's challenges at each step. There's hurdles to overcome. Good methodology, good application, good buy-in from Chicago Tube made those things surmountable. But there were definitely some key things that we think were success factors for us in the implementation. Things like we knew we had, a lot of customizations. You know, we had a lot of requests, and then we didn't necessarily grant them all. We used a crawl, walk, run model, and Chris and I just repeated crawl. We even had a little graphic that showed crawl, walk, run a lot to make certain that process owners knew we were listening to them. But if they were behaving like a kid in a candy store, they weren't necessarily going to get all the candy on day one. It's important to get yourself live and get transactional stability before you start trying to optimize things and trying to go beyond what your reach is. Another thing is we paid close attention to what the end users and the organization could do. I mean, if we were calling for a functional area to take on a process that was beyond their capability, we had to pay attention to that because that would put us in a situation possibly where some of the functionality might fail. So listening to the team was important. Making certain that we didn't say no, it was more like not now, you know, or we're prioritized at that sort of thing. We also had, you know, this is back to a little bit of the leadership thing, but our steering team sessions were all centered on risk management. We tried to be proactive. We tried to see what was happening ahead of time before it impacted the project, and then took steps to put moves in place, make moves to prevent negative impact of the project. There are certain things out of our control. And if you look at the title of this session, the word COVID is in there. Obviously, you know, as well as we were running the project, we couldn't do much to solve COVID for the world or for Chicago too. But it was a risk, and we had a way forward. We collaborated with the leadership group, with Chris's leadership and Don McNeely, the CEO, and really came through with workable ways to work through. If you remember, it wasn't just what was happening, it was the uncertainty of what was next. We really didn't know what we didn't know. So we had to have flexible plans. We had different scenarios that we would work through. And I think that is a recipe for success, is having that open dialogue with the leadership of the company. It isn't just about the project. It's primarily, we're there to talk about the project, but the dimensions of everything going on in the enterprise have to be taken into account, and they were very open and transparent about that. I know one challenge, and yeah, go ahead, Chris, jump in there.
Yeah, I just, you know, looking back at the implementation, certainly we could probably spend, you know, 2 hours going over that again, Joe, right? Because we lived it for 2 years. But, you know, I look back and I just look at that core team and just, you know, think how much of a, you know, we wouldn't have gotten to the other side without that core team, and really without that core team owning it. And what was interesting to me, and I think you said this at some point during that journey, Joe, was, you know, the core team at the start, they're kind of sitting back and observing, and they're not quite owning it yet, right? And they're kind of listening, but you got to get them from listening to owning, right? And by the end, they owned it. You know, they definitely owned it by the end, but it's that transformation that they got to go through, and it was really remarkable, you know, for me to watch that and to see, you know, they were calling meetings on their own, you know, without, you know, IT's involvement, and it was
wonderful.
I just really enjoyed that.
Yeah, it was wonderful, it made it easy to manage it. It didn't mean that our job was not challenging to get it done right. But boy, I can't imagine what it would have been if we'd been fighting proper engagement and proper ownership and the ability to cut across locations and agree on a common solution that might not be the best for me, but it's the best for the enterprise. That was a big deal. You know what, I know one of the challenges we had as we worked through, especially once we had the solution design delivered and we were validating in the final stages of validating the solution with end-to-end testing, was to be able to make certain that we could scale and that we could take the number of orders that we need to take per day, that we could ship the number of trucks that we need to ship per day, and the transactional volumes could be scalable. That's a key thing. That's a definite recommendation. One thing about the team that I always tell clients, you know, if you don't use the A team on the project, you're going to use the A team to fix the business later. And that is usually whenever you see, if you have experiences with or read about ERP engagements and ERP implementations that go in a ditch, that's usually can be traced back to the lack of proper process ownership. And I can't own if my key player isn't even involved. If the A person in my functional area isn't involved, it makes it tough for me to take the reins and drive. So it takes that A team being involved. And we were really blessed at Chicago Tube that the key players were involved. We even had one of the vice presidents leading one of the tracks. That was a big deal, you know. So think about the rest of the organization seeing that. They were all in. They knew that the company was serious.
Absolutely. And just to put a little bit finer point on that, ERP implementation is a heavy lift. I mean, that for any company, I don't care how big or small, it's a heavy lift. And the more people you have helping lift, the easier it's going to be. It's not going to be easy by any stretch. It's always a challenge, but it sure does make easier work if everybody's pulling on the same side of the rope and trying to get to the same place. And that is what those individual ownership points are, you know, for the team, is if they have an ownership and they can start solving problems, and your project managers, your other support people like Chris and Joe, they're not having to carry all of the water all of the time. And that's terribly important.
That's important. One of the
Joe,
things we have.
So I just want to offer, we, in retrospect, we had a successful implementation. We could talk about it, but, while you're in the middle of it, you have your highs and lows for sure. And, going back to that executive, sponsorship, we had to delay the project a couple times, and those were not easy conversations for me anyways to have, with our executive team to say, okay, we need more time. But they accepted that. They accepted that, okay, Joe, you and I and the other people on the core team who were leading said we need more time. They accepted it. And I think, they didn't have to, right? And we could have gone, earlier, and it probably would have been a mistake.
Right. That's an excellent point. One thing, in terms of thinking about expectations, one of the strong things that I think is important about implementation methodology is that there be gates with readiness criteria that are structured in order to make certain that you're reviewing and and that you're in position from a data standpoint, a people standpoint, a solution standpoint, an infrastructure standpoint, all the elements before you move forward. And we use that to sort of grade ourselves. There were times when maybe there was an expectations that we were slam dunking things, and yet the readiness criteria told us we were a B+, doing well, but we had gaps. And that kept us, in the zone where we had, I call it positive tension. We're moving with aggressiveness, but we're making certain that with a metered approach that we're delivering the things that have to be delivered along the way, or be willing to call the ball and say, we're not ready. And so I think that was a good thing. Obviously, I mentioned COVID earlier, and that was had an impact on us. We had to account for that in training, in the availability. Obviously, if we wanted to have a certain training delivered face to face, and with a certain dynamic, that it made it difficult, or basically that stopped us from being able to do it the way we wanted. So
I
I
would offer,
yeah.
I would offer, because our go live date was going to be May of 2020. May of 2020. That was what we were shooting for. And if you recall, March is when it all kind of went down. And that per Ultra's methodologies, when you start sending out letters and notices to your vendors and customers saying that you're going to switch, right? And we just sat in a room saying, I can't even imagine with all the uncertainty, receiving a letter from somebody saying, hey, we're switching systems right in the middle of all this. So, we had to delay it 2 more months. So we went live.
There was a volume benefit, I suppose, and I don't mean a benefit, but as a result of COVID, there was interruption in demand, and we were positioned from a supply standpoint for a higher level, so it made it a little easier that we weren't scrambling, right?
We had lower volume at go live, but there was a kind of a double-edged sword. We had lower volume, but we weren't unable to train properly. The core team had training, the super users had training, but the end users got remote training, and that wasn't quite the same. Especially in the warehouse. It was especially difficult in the warehouse.
Yeah.
And our plan was to have core team members at all the different locations, but we couldn't do that either.
Couldn't do that either.
Travel restrictions. So some of the guys were kind of
yeah.
And the other thing is, to your point, Joe, in terms of setting up those readiness gates, if all you're doing is driving to dates, then you risk not being ready even more. So while you don't want it to take forever, and you do need a target date for your go live. If you set those readiness gates rather than driving just to dates, then it's a lot easier to adjust for those unknowns that are out there.
And we baked those into our project cadence. It was part of our weekly program management office discussions. It was part of our steering team cycles that we would do monthly, sometimes more frequently than monthly if the conditions warranted, and we ran into a couple of conditions that did warrant it. So it's an important get right, I think, for implementing a project.
Absolutely.
We can talk about lessons learned if you want to advance there, just to kind of not wrap up, but give that overview. And we talked about problems that can occur. We definitely got hit with our share of issues, but the leadership, Chris, and keep in mind the IT organization takes its cue from Chris. So if Chris is dealing with these things, the rest of the group is all in as well. And how Chris was reacting to any unforeseen things made sure that they were positive about dealing with those as well. And it also portrayed a signal to the rest of the leadership around him that we're on track, we can handle this disruption, we know how we're going to solve still. And I thought that was a big deal.
Joe, I would offer too that we talk about proud moments. I saw people, you expect that out of management, you expect that out of you and me, but we saw people who were non-management in the company really rise to the challenge and take this challenge on, and they worked extra hard and they worked overtime and they really figured it out and try, fail, try, succeed. They went through it, so that was really impressive for me to see.
It was. And during testing, like when we were doing testing of end-to-end, sometimes we would find a defect that required the manufacturing team, which was a cross-location team, to circle wagons and figure out how to deal with something that we had either not considered previously or considered it but made a bad move. Maybe we made we didn't agree on the right design. And to Chris's point, they were proactive. They called meetings. They came together and figured out how they were going to deal with it. If that would have come down to Chris or I to call those meetings and make that happen, we'd still be working on the project. I don't know how that would have happened. Another lesson learned is about testing, and I know Chris, you want to speak to that one, Chris?
Yeah, so again, I'm a fan of Ultra's methodology, and part of it is having the end-to-end scenarios and working them in conference room pilots. I think what we found out was we were really good at the scenarios, but if we entered something wrong, we were not good at adjusting that, and we had to do some on-the-job training, on-the-fly training on how to do adjustments. And I wish we would have spent more time on that.
More time on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you think about a lot of training that gets done is, you train a little bit on the happy path, but what the bulk of the training is spent on what happens when it goes sideways. So, and that's one of those things that sometimes does get left out of the training is, okay, I fat fingered this and that's not what I meant to do. What do we do about that? So that's something that needs to be, thought about during your testing.
Okay, and then as far as the startup, from a business perspective, you can share with us on that, Chris, but we know that we didn't disrupt anything. We didn't break anything.
Right, and I call it the low bar of success for ERP, right? So we didn't crash and burn, so we're going to call it a win. So
that's right.
Yeah, but we were functional in all areas. We didn't shut down the shipping, we didn't shut down receiving. In the back office, invoicing, quoting, getting quotes out to our customers. Everything processed a little slower. We had that productivity dip, and we had our few issues that you always run into, but we didn't close down the doors.
Yes, and that's important. It is a low bar for success, but the flip side is that there are so many examples that we read about all the time about people that disrupt the business, and so avoiding business disruption turns out to be a lot harder than it looks, and we achieved that. Yeah. So it's definitely a something to strive for, right? And we have a methodology for that, and we were able to improvise what needed to be improvised, but we were able to follow some structure to prevent that. And we definitely learned some stuff. One comment on adjusting transactions or handling errors in legacy systems, especially the old school green screen stuff. Many times, especially if I've been in my job 20 years, 30 years, I know how to solve a problem if it comes up. I know who to run to. I know what caused it. I have direct line of sight. On integrated systems, the problem solving cycle is different. There's a different way to troubleshoot what happened. You might need to inspect the customer master. You might need to go upstream and find out that in order management that they entered the order without a flag set. And now over here I am weeks later and I'm unable to generate shipping paperwork. I mean, it's an integrated solution, and therefore the problem solving or the error correction on it is more integrated. And that's one that like Chris was saying, that's a lesson learned that we would have, I think, spent more time with. We talked about leadership and their sponsorship was a big deal. Remember, we said eight plants, and there were 2 or 3 functions that weren't plants, but they were centralized. So if you think of them as a go live, we took we did a concurrent deployment. I don't like to use certain terms like Big Bang, but we did a concurrent deployment across the enterprise. And in order to do that, our concept was we're going to create the enterprise design, build out the enterprise solution using these cross-location process teams. And we had a leader for each functional area, and they had a cross-location remit that they were charged with. Well, that doesn't come easy. To sponsor that takes a lot of commitment from the leadership team. And they certainly showed that commitment. Obviously, when COVID hit and other unforeseen things hit, they showed flexibility and were able to collaborate with us to come up with solutions rather than come up with frustration that doesn't move the needle in a positive way. I think the communication channels were good and very candid. When you get, when you're sitting a team, you think about Chris as VP of IT, myself, the Epicore project manager, and we're sitting in a room with the CEO and their direct reports. We definitely got a lot of open channels of communication, And so we were prepared to speak in terms that they could understand, and we were prepared to listen to any firm and hard direction we needed to hear. And we kind of got good at anticipating what are the key hot buttons and the key heat map elements that we have to bring to the table. But if anybody is blessed to be able to work with Don McNeely, the CEO of Chicago 2, you're going to find out that he's so insightful that no matter how well you prepare, he always had something for us to come away with. And certainly we had that. But we had that because we had those open channels. And by the way, it was really cool. Whenever we kicked off a pilot, whenever we kicked off a significant event that wasn't even a testing event, he was present. He was present because he committed to be, but it was more than that. He would come to Chris, he would come to us and say, how can I jump in and show my support? And he would have done what we would have asked him to. So Chris, I think that's I think that was a big leadership example that I know in my career I've seen leaders, and that was an example of upper echelon leadership.
I concur. We, like I said at the start, with the two big decisions, executive buy-in, as a company project, well, that just goes to show, and then using the yourselves, who we're happy to find as the consultants. So yeah, it was a win. Yeah,
one thing, I guess we're being kind of very business oriented. Keep in mind, we had fun. It wasn't just a grim determination to back up and charge hard at the wall. We found ways to take what we had and have fun with it. So I think that was good. And what I would say as a wrap up is that any project, whether it's easy or hard, it's much more fun and easier to do if you have the right partners. So I know that Chicago 2, Epicore, that was a good partnership, and it was equal parts ownership, and of issues that went well, we celebrated together. Issues that weren't going well, we dealt with them together. So that's wraps us up. Kristen, I am going to hand it back to you, if I might.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate it. And thanks to everybody on the panel. So what we'd like to do is share some additional resources to help our audience today with their own project journeys. All right. So first up, we've got from Ultra, the comprehensive ERP guide, as well as the official case study on Chicago Tube and Iron. And then from our friends at Epicore, we have an educational video on digital transformation in a post-COVID world, not if, but how. So I will send everyone a link following today's session that includes links to all of these assets, as well as a recording of the session. We are just at the end of our time today, so we're going to go ahead and skip Q&A. If you did send in a question, we'll make sure to reach out to you directly. And if you could advance the slide to our last slide, we'll go ahead and conclude the webinar. So from all of us here at Ultra, thank you to everyone for joining us. We'd like to wish you a great rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.